Now, as in every course section, I got a brand new project, just created a Go module with the Go mod init command. And I want to start with lists of data, with managing lists of data and what I mean with that. And for that, I'll add a lists.go file. And in there, as always, I'll add my main package and then also my main function because we'll still need that. Now, what do I mean when I say lists of data? Well, let's start in a different way. We did learn about that struct, where we maybe have a product, and hence we have our struct, and in there we then have a title for the product, and maybe an ID, and maybe a price, which is a float. That's what we saw before in the course. The struct concept or feature is a very useful feature because it allows you as a developer to group data together. We group a title, an ID, and a price together into one data package. And organizing data like this is super important because very often in your programs you have more complex pieces of data that you want to express. But in a nutshell, a struct is a data grouping mechanism. And we do group different kinds of data into one piece of data. A title, an ID, and a price are very different data pieces that are grouped together into one data piece. That's how you can think about a struct. Now, in some programs, actually, as it turns out in a lot of programs, you don't just need such kinds of data groups, but sometimes you also have similar pieces of data that need to be grouped together. And that might sound very abstract, so let me give you an example. What if we would be building a Go application that's dealing with some data analysis? And therefore, as part of this application, we might get various values. For example, some weather data, maybe some product prices, which we want to analyze. Doesn't matter. We get different pieces of data. Let's say different numbers. Now, they all express the same thing. For example, if we get temperature values, every number might express a temperature in Celsius or Fahrenheit. But we of course have different values. Now, if we work with such kind of data, where we have many values that describe the same thing but have different values, then a struct won't help us. We could, of course, create some struct temperature data like that, and in there have the temperature of day 1, which holds, let's say, a float. And then we have day 2, which holds a float. But doing it like this, solving this problem like this, would be very annoying. Because we have to know in advance how many days of data we want to have. And even if we do know that, we have to do a lot of typing to describe all those days, to set up all these day keys. So that's very annoying. It would lead to a lot of code and to code that's quite unreadable. And working with that kind of data would then also be a bit annoying throughout the application. That's why for such cases where we describe the same thing and we just have different values, we have a different kind of data structure built into Go. And we have this kind of data structure in basically every programming language out there. It's just a name that's different between all those languages. We have a so-called array. In Python, it would be called a list. In JavaScript, it's also called an array. And an array is a data structure that holds values, potentially different values, that kind of describe the same thing. Now let me show you how we create such an array. For that, I'll create a brand new variable that will hold my array. And let's say we want to work with a bunch of prices here. But of course, it's up to you. Here, I'll just go with some prices. And let's say that should in the end be a list of floating point values. So a list of floating point numbers that we want to store in this prices variable. Now, since it's a brand new variable, we'll use the : operator to create it and set a value immediately. And now we can turn this into an array by using a special syntax. We want to have a list of floating point values, as I said, so I'll type float 32 or 64, doesn't matter. And then in front of that, we add square brackets. This is an important piece of syntax that tells Go that we don't want to create a single floating point value that should be stored in prices, but instead a list of floating point numbers. Now between those square brackets, we then have to tell Go how many values we want to store, and let's say that's 4. So we want to store 4 floating point values in a list of floating point values inside of prices. Now it's still not all. When using this syntax here and immediately assigning a concrete value to prices, which is what we do with this operator, we also have to let Go know which values should be stored in this array. And for that we add opening and closing curly braces here. Now here, between those curly braces, we can now enter the values that should be stored in this list. So something like 10.99, 9.99, 40, 5.99, and let's say 20.00, or just .0. This now creates an array, a list of 4 numbers, 4 floats that's stored in prices. And you can create arrays based on any kinds of values, not just floats. You can create an array of strings, of integers, even arrays of structs and other arrays, so-called nested arrays, are possible. But let's start simple. Let's take a look at what we created here by using the format package and calling the println function, to which I then pass prices. And now we're not using this struct anywhere, so therefore I'll get rid of that since it was only there for demo purposes anyways. Now with that array created, if we open that terminal here, if we run our module, we get that list of data output here. And that's how we can create such a list of data. And the key difference compared to a struct really is that all these values describe the same thing, a price. But of course we describe different prices, and hence we have a list of these different values that describe the same thing. And that's a fundamentally different idea than we had it with a struct. And different scenarios and use cases in your code simply require different solutions.